Yes. There's a couple reasons that you want to negotiate a termination provision, but first, let me talk about the reason why I understand that you don't. You go into a contract optimistic, everything's going to go great, you're excited to start work, they're excited to have you, and the last thing you want to talk about is what happens if we really screw the pooch and you have to fire us. I mean, that's not a great look. It's a hard discussion to have. It anticipates that something's going to go drastically wrong during the course of this project. It's not the happy talk of beginning a project that you actually want to have, but it's vital for a couple reasons. Number one, you want to make sure that the general contractor only has certain rights in the event of a termination for cause. Now look, the general contractor is going to have the upper hand here. The general contractor is going to have the right to withhold your money until the dust clears and it figures out how much it's been damaged, and then release anything over that, or demand that you make up any difference. That's a given in a termination for cause. But there are a couple things to think about. One is, in a typical termination for cause provision, it says that when you leave the site, the general contractor has the right to all the materials and supplies and equipment and tools and vehicles, etc. Yet don't do that. Here's what the general contractor has the right to. They certainly have the right to take any materials on site that were ordered for the job that they paid for. They certainly have that right. And you probably want to keep materials on the job even if they haven't paid for it, because the money that they owe is on your side of the ledger, and so you're going to be able to offset that. But I always cross out the language saying that they're entitled to your tools, your equipment, your vehicles. Not only because they're not entitled to that, but what if you left tools, equipment, and vehicles there and they damaged them and they lost them? Maybe they're not even insured to operate certain pieces of equipment. Who bears the loss then? And I can tell you that in over 30 years, I can't even remember a time after I've crossed out tools, equipment, and vehicles from a termination for cause that the general contractor got upset or opposed my revision. Because it's standard language, and they're like, yeah, you're right, we're not entitled to your tools, we're not entitled to your equipment, we're not entitled to your vehicles or forklifts or scaffolding or whatever you've got on site. We just really want the materials that go into the site that we've either paid for or that we're going to pay for, that go into the deliverable. So that's one of the things you negotiate. Another thing that you want to make sure of, and it's common sense, but a lot of the provisions aren't written that way. You see, the provision should say that if you're terminated for cause and the general has to bring in a replacement contractor, that you are liable for any excess cost incurred. So that means if it would have taken $100,000 to finish your work, meaning that the general would have paid you $100,000 to finish your scope, and they had to bring in a replacement contractor and they had to pay that replacement contractor $125,000, then you're responsible for the delta, $25,000. That's the way it should be written. The word excess should be in there. But a lot of times these termination for cause provisions are written to say that in the event you're terminated for cause, you are liable for the cost of completing the work. And you're not. Because the general would have had to pay you $100,000 anyway. So you're not all of a sudden subsidizing the job. You're not all of a sudden liable for every dollar that that replacement contractor is going to charge. All you're responsible for is the delta between what you would have been paid under your contract and what the replacement contractor got paid because you were terminated. And remember, the other thing you have to look at is it has to be the same scope. The general is not allowed to bring in a replacement contractor to build the Cadillac when you are only contracted to build the VW. So the answer to the question is yes. You should negotiate every word of the subcontract agreement, or at least look at it to see if negotiations are necessary. And even if it's an unpleasant conversation to have, negotiate what happens in the event of a termination. because you'll be glad you did.